So today, we're diving deep into a situation unfolding in Florida right now.
Yeah.
And, well, it's not as simple as just a hurricane, right? This Hurricane Milton, it's really highlighting how politics and disaster response, they get all tangled up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that it's an election year just throws, fuel on the fire, makes everything so much more complicated.
Exactly. Category 5 hurricane headed straight for Florida. And already we're seeing tension, like serious tension, between Governor DeSantis and Vice President Harris.
It's impossible to ignore it, really, especially when DeSantis comes out and basically accuses Harris of trying to, and I'm quoting here, politicize the entire storm.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little because it's kind of loaded, isn't it? He's saying she's turning this into a political thing instead of just focusing on getting ready for the hurricane. But I mean, haven't we seen this forever? Like disaster response in politics, it always feels intertwined.
Right. It's almost like a law of, a law of politics, I guess.
Think about Hurricane Katrina, right? The way that whole thing was handled, it became this huge political football.
Yeah, and it makes sense in a way, because when something like this happens, especially during an election year, every single thing you do, every statement you make, it's all viewed through this political lens, whether you want it to or not.
And it gets even trickier when you consider what we heard from some folks close to DeSantis. Apparently, he's been dodging calls from Harris about the hurricane prep. They said the calls seemed political, so he just wasn't taking them.
Which, okay, I can see how that would raise some eyebrows.
But then, very publicly, he says he's happy to work with the White House to get resources and support. So am I missing something, or is that like the opposite message?
It does seem a little contradictory, right? It makes you wonder about the motivation there. Like, on the one hand, he's completely shutting down any communication that he sees as politically driven, which you could argue, fine, maybe he's just trying to stay focused on the task at hand. But then on the other hand, he's totally willing to collaborate if it means he gets what he needs, in this case, federal aid.
It's like he wants the help, just, without actually having to, talk to anyone.
Right, exactly. And this kind of gets to the heart of the really, really tricky situation politicians find themselves in during these kinds of crises. It's this balancing act. They need to look strong and in control, reassure everyone that they're on top of it.
But then also be able to, admit they need help, work with people they might not agree with.
Exactly. It takes a certain kind of finesse, and you can't please everyone. And honestly, the timing of it all just makes it even more, intense.
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is just a few weeks after Hurricane Helene hit Florida, right? They're still dealing with the fallout from that.
And of course, we've got the whole presidential campaign going on, which, like we said, adds another layer of, everything to it.
It's like a perfect storm of, not the right way to put it, I guess, but you know what I mean. And then on top of all of this tension, we've got these competing stories coming out.
Oh, here we go.
So DeSantis is saying he had no clue Harris was even trying to reach him, right? But then the White House is saying, nope, we reached out. We even invited him on a damage survey trip, and he said no. So, what's the truth?
This is the classic he said, she said scenario, but on a national stage with a hurricane bearing down.
Yeah.
And both sides, they're trying to control how this looks, how people see them.
It's all about the optics.
Exactly. DeSantis wants to look like he's above the politics, laser focused on helping people. And then the White House, they kind of want to paint him as uncooperative, right? Maybe even a little indifferent to what could happen to people in Florida.
So it becomes this game of strategy. It's not just about the hurricane anymore. It's like, how do I make myself look good while maybe also making my opponent look bad?
Right, and the stakes couldn't be higher. There's the election, obviously, but also how these actions might actually affect how they respond to the hurricane. It's almost like they're speaking different languages,
And it's not just what they're doing, right? The way they're talking about it, it's heated. I'm reading this quote from Harris where she's calling DeSantis's actions, and I quote, utterly irresponsible, selfish. She even says it's more about political gamesmanship than actually trying to, help people.
Yeah, and DeSantis doesn't hold back either. There's this Fox News interview where he basically says Harris is, and again, I'm quoting here, delusional if she thinks he's not focused on the people of Florida and that she's never contributed anything to disaster relief.
So you have these very pointed, very public jabs back and forth, and I can't help but wonder, is this helping anyone? Does this kind of rhetoric actually make things better for the people in the path of this hurricane?
It's a really good question, and honestly, I think it's something we need to be asking more often. Because, yeah, these exchanges, they might get people riled up, grab headlines, but at what cost? Especially in a situation like this where lives are literally at stake, we have to think about the impact of this kind of, I don't know, almost combative approach.
Because it feels like if the people in charge are too busy taking shots at each other, they're not actually, focused on the problem at hand.
Exactly. It's like if you're trying to work together, coordinate a response, you need people communicating clearly, working towards a shared goal. There's no room for ego or, trying to score political points when you have a hurricane about to make landfall.
And it's easy to get lost in the political back and forth, but we can't forget, this isn't just some abstract political debate. This is impacting real people right now. The article talked about mandatory evacuations in some parts of Florida, and there was that picture of a baseball stadium being turned into a shelter. It's a good reminder that this is serious.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this whole thing, it goes beyond just DeSantis and Harris. It feels like it speaks to a larger trend, a sort of breakdown in political discourse, where it's less about actually solving problems and more about, like you said, scoring points, even when the stakes are incredibly high.
It makes you wonder, can we even separate disaster response from politics anymore? Is that even possible in this day and age?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's tough because there's no simple answer. But what we do know is that in these moments, leadership requires this really delicate balance. You need to project strength, calm, reassure people that things are being handled.
But also be willing to reach across the aisle, put differences aside when it really matters.
Exactly. It's a tough line to walk, and it makes you think about what we should expect from our leaders, especially in times like this. What does real leadership actually look like?
Because ultimately, shouldn't it be about putting the needs of the people first?
Without a doubt. Their first priority should always be the well-being, the safety of the people they represent.
Which in this case means maybe those calls shouldn't have been ignored. Just saying.
Right. It makes you wonder about priorities, about whether the goal is really to help people or if it's something else entirely.
So as we head into this hurricane, I think the big question is, what does responsibility actually look like? In a world where even a natural disaster can become this political football, how do we move forward?
Yeah, responsibility. It feels like such a big question, especially now with everything so divided. Where do we even begin? How do we make sure that when something like this happens, the focus is actually on, helping people, not scoring political points?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, for sure, but I think it starts with, each of us being informed. And I don't just mean reading headlines. I mean really digging in, finding sources you trust that are objective, and really understanding the nuances.
So more than just, oh, there's a hurricane coming.
Right. Like understanding the science behind hurricanes, how you prepare for something like this, how you respond to it, and how political decisions play into all of that. So do your research. Don't just take things at face value.
Exactly. Check those facts, especially when something sounds, a little too attention-grabbing to be true. And then, and this is a big one, be willing to have those tough conversations, even with people you might disagree with.
It's about finding that common ground, right?
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, a hurricane doesn't care what your political party is. We're all in this together.
It's that shared humanity thing again, right? Even when we see things differently, we can still find ways to connect.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate your own voice, your own agency in this. Talk to your elected officials. Let them know what matters to you, what you think they should be prioritizing. Hold them accountable for the decisions they're making.
That's what voting's all about, right?
Yeah.
Making your voice heard.
Exactly. And support the organizations that are doing good work on the ground, the ones who are actually out there helping. It all makes a difference.
Every little bit helps, right?
It really does. Because when it comes down to it, this goes beyond hurricanes, beyond politics even. It's about who we want to be as a society, what we value, especially when things get tough.
It's about choosing compassion over just being cynical all the time, choosing to work together instead of always being at odds, choosing to actually do something, not just throw up your hands, be like, well, what can you do?
You said it. And as Hurricane Milton gets closer to Florida, I think it's a powerful reminder that we're all connected in ways we don't always think about. The choices that are being made by our leaders, by each of us, they have real-world consequences.
It makes you think about the kind of world we're building, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, let's work towards a world where when these things happen, when disaster strikes, our response is about our shared humanity, not about our differences.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that about wraps up this deep dive into, a lot of things. Politics, disaster response, individual responsibility, all with a Category 5 hurricane looming in the background. But the conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking about these things, keep talking about them, challenge yourself, challenge each other, and maybe, just maybe, we can start to shift the conversation, even if it's just a little bit.